Nice case, good power supply, and a great looking graphics card, but what's up with those cables? They look terrible. If you've spent a lot of money on your dream computer components, but those ugly looking cables are still keeping you from being fully satisfied, I have a great solution for you, and most importantly, it's much cheaper than you might expect. I am Powell, and this is TechManiac HD. Let's get started. I think all my viewers know a good power supply is essential. When buying one, we pay attention to many aspects: power, efficiency certification, protections, modularity, noise level, brand, and of course, the warranty is something no one overlooks with this kind of purchase. We even consider cable length. But does anyone ever look at whether the cables look decent or if they're as ugly as a November night? Well, no. With so many different aspects to consider when buying a power supply, it's impossible to also pay attention to what the cables look like. Let's not kid ourselves. When you're buying one, that's probably the least important thing. Everything else matters more because you have to set your priorities. But when we're building our dream computer, come on, how does it look to others? I mean, seriously, what does it look like? A power supply for $1,000, and the bundle of cables looks worse than the ignition wires in a Malloc. Now they give us black cables instead of those old mustard and ketchup colored ones. In the era of glass cases and really beautiful looking computer components, this tangled black mess doesn't really make much of a difference. I'm not sure if Lian was the original brand for everyone in the industry, but it was definitely the first one that mattered in this product category. Products like cable extensions that connect the power supply to the motherboard or graphics card, because those are the bundles that are most exposed. This way, we connect a much better looking extension, and with minimal effort and, I want to emphasize, guaranteed compatibility with any power supply, we can quickly solve the problems that have been bothering us. A brilliant solution, simple, fast, and for everyone. If you paid extra for a modular power supply, you probably did it with the idea of swapping out one or all of the cables for different ones, for example, those with cable mod. Honestly, I advise you not to go down that path. I was once fascinated and tempted by the same solution. But first, it's very expensive. Second, it doesn't look as good as an extension. And third, and probably most importantly, compatibility. Or rather, the lack of it. Even if you think today that you'll never replace your power supply with another one because you spent a fortune on this one and did 300 hours of research, you still might be surprised. I'm also surprised that after a relatively short time, I replaced my 1200 watt Cooler Master, for which I had a full set of cable mod cables, with a quieter, more energy efficient and smaller one. In times when undervolting makes more sense than overclocking, keeping such a 1200 watt not so quiet monster just didn't make any sense to me anymore. Now I have the cables, though they're always lying around somewhere. I don't even know where the rest are, and they cost over 800 zlotys. That's why today I'd like to offer you something much better. Let me introduce a product I bought from the Chinese store PC Cooling Mode. It looks almost identical to the mentioned Lian Streamer Plus, and its name sounds like something straight out of OLX, which is not Lian Streamer Plus. Maybe they lacked a name idea, or just wanted better Google results. That's not important to us. What matters is whether the product is of good quality and if we can trust it. We'll soon examine the extension cord and run load tests. But why would we even choose such a product? Well, as always, it's about money. The extension cord for the motherboard from Lian costs around 314 zlotys. For a triple 8-pin for the graphics card, they ask for almost 340, and if your graphics card has a double 8-pin, you can get the extension for less than 250 zlotys. Prices may change. Find updated links in the description. On the other hand, what I bought is much cheaper. The extension for the motherboard costs a little less than half that amount. The triple 8-pin is 54% cheaper, and the double one is also $100 cheaper. As a result, I paid about 340 zlotys for the set I needed, including shipping, instead of 650 or 700, which in my opinion makes a huge difference. Looking at the product I bought, I have to admit that it looks exactly as I expected. All the components are the same shade of white, except for the addressable red-green-blue cable, which has a slightly more bluish tint. although in fact that's exactly how it was presented on the store's website, so I can't say that I feel misled in any way. You buy what you see in the picture, and that's how it should be. Besides, in most cases, this cable will be hidden in the service part of the case anyway, so it doesn't really matter. The material used for the plug seems to be hard and solid. The top part with the LEDs, which serves as an aesthetic cover for the cables, is flexible. I'd even say it's a bit rubbery. It's very good that it can be nicely bent and adjusted in any direction, but the downside is that it's the kind of rubber that attracts all kinds of dirt. It's hard to notice this from the photos on the manufacturer's website, but the 8-pin connectors here can be separated. What's more, it's not, let's say, a shoddy solution like in the original power supply cables, where those extra 2 pins are always falling out. Sometimes you really have to struggle to keep them from slipping out when plugging them into the graphics card. There's no way these extensions will come apart on their own during installation, and that's something that was very important to me. Maybe it's not that important for everyone, but as a reviewer, I sometimes have to take out and put in the graphics card 20 or even 30 times a day. So yes, it definitely improves my work comfort, but it also saves time. Despite appearances, cable thickness is very important. A thin cable has higher resistance, and as a result, with higher amperage, it can heat up. Of course, in the case of a power-hungry card, a cable that's a few or even a dozen degrees warmer than room temperature doesn't do any harm. But if you use a cable that's too thin, the resistance can increase to the point where it overheats and could end up melting the insulation or the connectors. And that would be a situation none of us would want. That's why it's important that the manufacturer uses a cable with a thickness of 18 American wire gauge, which is just over 1 millimeter in diameter. So the thickness is okay, but it's still worth checking how the extension cord performs under real load, but before we do that, we should connect it. Installation is simple in theory. Remove the cable from the motherboard, plug it into the extension, then reconnect it to the motherboard. But in my case, it was the other way around. I don't know if someone at the factory made a mistake or what, but the aesthetic element with LEDs covering the cables was on the inside, and it should be on the outside, so it wasn't quite as planned. We won't think of anything smart here now. We have to manually remove all the cables from the combs and put them back in, but this time correctly. Fortunately and unfortunately at the same time, the cables fit very well in their places, so you can't just disconnect them all with a single pull. You can pull out a few of them at a time, although it's best to do it one by one. Once we've removed all the cables, we flip them over and carefully plug them into the correct places. Let's not kid ourselves. This procedure takes a good 10 or even 15 minutes. After such a flip, the cable was ready to be plugged in. Connecting the graphics card extension is also very easy. Just plug in the 8-pin connectors and you're done. At least if you want to run the power to the card from below. In my case, that's not possible, because the cutout for the service area is too small here, and there are already a lot of other cables running through it. To run the extension from the top, I had to reroute all the cables, and in this extension, although I already have some experience, it went much faster. Connecting the lighting was the least problematic. Here we have 3-pin 5-volt addressable red, green, blue. We plug them into the motherboard, controller, or anything that provides the appropriate control signal. I connected to the long bundle of the remaining equipment, and now that everything is in place, it's high time to start testing. A 2kg RX 7900 XTX with a GPU total graphics power of 355 watts will help us here, though the entire card still uses over 400 watts. Video random access memory, red, green, blue fans, and other printed circuit board components also need power. So it's the perfect setup for this kind of testing. After 30 minutes of this constant relentless stress, I measured the temperatures with a pyrometer. The card's backplate was about 55 degrees Celsius, and the connectors near the card's edge were between 44 and 47 degrees. What's funny is that the LEDs here shine so brightly that you can even feel the increased temperature on them. They're easily above 30 degrees. I know that a pyrometer isn't the perfect tool for this. But getting back to the measurements, the plug on the back of the card, as you probably expect, is exposed to the heat coming off it, which of course affects the results to some extent. That's why I also measured the temperature at the connection between the extension and the power supply cables, meaning the ones located on the service side of the case. The room temperature was 25 degrees, so those 38, 34 degrees with a hot computer that was pushed up against the wall anyway, that's basically nothing. Remember, a lot of electrical energy flows through here. If the tested extension for the card can handle it, then the 24-pin cable for the motherboard won't have any problem at all transmitting a lower amperage. Since we know the extensions are safe and work with powerful graphics cards or processors, it's time to discuss the lighting itself. The effects look truly fantastic. The colors are very vivid, saturated, and very, very bright. Here I have to apologize to you because my camera isn't able to capture such a dynamic range, so you can barely see the colors reproduced by the extensions. On the other hand, the fans, RAM, and graphics card barely light up. In other words, the human eye sees it much better than I'm able to show you in this footage, although I have to admit that if they shone as brightly as the rest of the computer components, there wouldn't be a problem. The extensions are bright, maybe even too bright. Of course, a lot depends on the operating mode, colors, and so on, but they will always be brighter than the rest. Now you can see what the final effect looks like. First, with an almost completely transparent side panel. In my opinion, it's already a bit better than without the panel, because some of that light is actually dimmed and it spreads better inside the case. And since I have a second, darker side panel for my case, we'll check how the extensions look in that situation as well. If you're interested, I'll leave a link to the full review of this case in the description as well. And you know what? At first, I was overwhelmed by how bright it was, but with a normal tinted panel, it looks reasonable. Of course, I'd still prefer if the cables glowed a bit less, but with the side panel on, it's already quite decent. You know about the advantages. As for the drawbacks, I'd obviously point out the fact that they're definitely too bright. The addressable red-green-blue standard doesn't support lowering brightness, which is disappointing. I also don't like the fact that I had to reconnect the 24-pin cable. Someone clearly messed up here. Regarding the card extension, it would be best to run it from the bottom, which would work well, but that's not possible in my case. Maybe if they designed easily detachable combs, which would allow for quickly switching from one side to the other, that would be some kind of solution. I also regret that we don't have the option to choose the length here, because it might happen that someone will need longer extensions for their case. I don't even know if you noticed, but my 24-pin is faulty. In one spot, there's no reproduction of green, red is there, blue is there, but because there's no green, the other intermediate colors kind of fade away a bit. Such a defect entitles me to request a new product, but personally, it doesn't really bother me that much. It's also worth noting that while the flexible rubber is, well, flexible, the cables themselves can't change their length. And so, after bending, some will be stretched, while others will be looser. You can smooth it out a bit, move that middle comb, but with bigger bends, we'll just have to accept it. However, I was tempted by such extensions and bought them of my own free will. Of course, there are plenty of alternatives. Who knows, maybe you'll find something better for less. I spent many hours browsing different options, and what I bought seemed to me the most solid and trustworthy. I installed them in my case a while ago and remain very satisfied with my choice. Basically, I usually use my computer with the red, green, blue turned off anyway. And you know what? Those extensions still look great. Maybe even better than when the red, green, blue is on. But that's just a matter of taste. What matters to me is that it has significantly improved my comfort while working with the computer. But most importantly, my build looks a lot better than before. And since this expense was half of what I would normally pay for a branded product, I think it's an item worth recommending. You'll find the link in the description and pinned comment. If you like this, visit my website at www.techmaniaxd.pl. Thanks to the intuitive menu, you'll definitely find more inspiring content there. See you in the next one.